السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اهدنا إلى ما تحبه وترضاه ويسر لنا أمورنا كلها. اللهم يسر لنا كلها واهدنا فيمن هديت وعافنا فيمن عافيت وتولنا فيمن توليت وأرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. Welcome to, I guess, the first of a series we're planning to start, inshallah. On Friday nights, we're going to always try to have some sort of a family topic or halaqa. And inshallah, the plan is as we progress, the program is going to develop, hopefully, to include a program for the entire family, which includes children of different ages. But inshallah, this is just a start of starting with the halaqa. Now, what I wanted to talk about, because this is going to be hopefully the future of family halaqa nights, a topic that is very closely related, but is also very, very important, because we have to understand living in a society as a minority, we should comprehend the importance and the value of this topic, but also the danger of neglecting the importance of this topic. And it is safeguarding our first line of defense, which is the family. I'm going to explain why I titled it this way, as the first line of defense. But before we start, inshallah, I might, I think I'm going to divide you into groups to answer some questions, just because I don't like monologues, right? I prefer dialogues as opposed to monologues. So I'll probably ask you questions and ask you to group up, whatever the case is. But the relation to the title, and some people might find it interesting, why is it the first line of defense? It's really based on understanding of the practice of the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and his advice, but also even coming after that, right? So of course the Prophet ﷺ's emphasis and setting up the family system, and even Islam, how it kind of tailored and divided certain rights and roles in a family. There's a reason for that. And it's to establish a family that is very stable, that is very functional, to build a society. But also then come modern research, and it complements that, right? I'm not going to use research, psychological research or social science research to verify it, but no, it actually complements it, right? Because in the end, our Quran and our Sunnah that has been preserved supersedes any sort of science, right? Because the science will always change over time. However, what it seems these researchers has talking about is that how the family unit has the most important impact on the children, which later form the next generation. And when we call it the first line of defense, really it is the family unit is that what helps preserve our present and the future, right? Followed by other lines of defense that we put to help fortify things. Type. I'm going to start with a question, right? The question is, what is the objective of the family in Islam? So this is a bit of a critical thinking a little bit. What is the objective of the family in Islam? You can talk to your partner. It's a good way to introduce each other too. If you guys don't know each other, talk to each other. I'm gonna do what I do in class. You got 2 minutes. Let's go. 2 minutes. Share pair. It's called a share pair. Dr. Azhar, come on, talk to each other. What is the objective? Here's the question. What is the objective of the family in Islam? No, there's no explanation. It's an objective, goal. What is the goal of family in Islam? That's a start. I'll give you 2 minutes to think about it. You know the girls, mashallah, are very much better than the gentlemen in pair shares. Wallahi, don't be shy. Brainstorming is good. Exchanging ideas is good. So, you can talk to the person beside you. I guarantee you they're going to get it before you do. Type, they died down. You guys got the conclusion? They haven't even started discussing it. What is the objective? What's the objective of family in Islam? No, the answer is no. To strive together to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that is close to what the Sheikh had mentioned. What did you say? Raise Islamic way. He says strive together. So that is actually part of it. That is part of it. Any other ideas or opinions from this side? Say what? That's not the objective of the family in Islam. Those are means to fulfill an objective. Right? Yes. To make their life easier and yours. That is a result, but not the objective. That is a result, a consequence. Obviously, yes, if we meet their objective, there's those positive results of, like, having yourself, like, a peaceful life. They have a good life in this world and the hereafter. Last one. I like that one. Healthy family makes a healthy community. Really, so I'm going to combine those two, right? So I'm going to combine those two, essentially. So the objective of the family, right, in Islam is to establish the basic Islamic unit of a Muslim society that is founded on servitude to Allah. So I just combined what you guys say together, but I just paraphrase it, okay? So the objective of a family in Islam, I'm going to tell you why I paraphrase, because if you understand it this way, it will give you an entire new view, right, of perhaps how we should interact and what is our objective. Because if we don't have an objective and goal, essentially, how are we raising, like, families? Why are we establishing them? Right? It becomes more cultural and habitual, and that will change over time. The definition of a family, as we know, will change over time unless we have a clear goal and objective. So once again, the Islamic objective of a family is to establish the basic Islamic unit, right? The basic Islamic unit in a Muslim society that is based on the servitude of Allah. So this is why in Islam, for example, faith constitutes the bedrock of the institution of the family. The family is an institution, right? It is that foundation. And it's based on, essentially, faith and Islam. And so that is the objective. That is to fulfill, that is found on servitude, but to establish an Islamic unit. If we put it in that perspective, then every Muslim family would essentially organize of everything that it conducts and its behavior based on a specific framework from the get-go, right? There's that framework, we understand that it's there, but also at the same time what's happening is that we have a clear view that we are doing something for an objective. It is servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if we veer away from it as a family or members, this tells us, okay, we're moving away, we got to go back again to what we're supposed to do. And with that perspective, even the things that we do as a family, right? Our outings, our playtime, our discussions will be much more productive. How we raise our children, how they treat us will be based on, once again, that objective of servitude and building that Islamic unit of a greater Islamic society, right? Now, this also at the same time tells us why the family itself is important. And that is the second question. Like, you look at the objective and the importance of it, right? Maybe perhaps you can achieve the objective in another way, but this is where you understand the importance of the family also. It becomes a bit more complicated. And so why is the family important, right? Why is the family important? And we can refer to the Quran, for example, many verses of the Quran. I'm going to mention just one of them that's very popularly mentioned in a lot of, nikahs, I guess, right? And matrimonial services or premaritals or all these things. And it's the verse from Surah Al-Rum, verse number 21, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُم مَّوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Swallow the mic. Hard. Can we increase the volume of this thing, Sheikh? All right. By the way, this is me yelling. Like, this is, I guess I'm, alhamdulillah. Can everybody hear me at the back? Everybody good? Excellent. So the meaning of this verse is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ, and from among his signs, أَنْ خَلَقَ لَكُم مِّنْ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَزْوَاجًا, that he created from yourself mates, right? لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا. That's the first thing. لِتَسْكُنُوا إِلَيْهَا, so that you find tranquility in them. And that is one of the things important of a family, is that it provides a sense of tranquility, grounding, peace, right? وَجَعَلَ بَيْنَكُمْ مَوَدَّةً وَرَحْمَةً, and to establish that, essentially, how? By placing between you mawadda and rahma, which is affection and mercy. Is this better? Is this one? I guess this is better. It has an echo though. It has an echo, ya Sheikh. This is for Quran recitation. طيب, I think I'm going to have to move it a bit further. All right, so from this verses and other aspects, so bearing in mind the whole aspect of tranquility, this is really important. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala legislates things, He knows what He created, and He knows what's beneficial for them. And He knows when He created us, He created within us multiple layers that needs to be taken into account, including the psychological well-being, right? The emotional well-being, the physical well-being, right? We need to nurture our spirit, our emotional aspect, our physical aspect. And so Allah subhanahu. Sheikh, this is not working for me. طيب. But anyway, one thing we can understand this, of the importance of family, is that it is the basis of the entire social cultural structure, right? The entire basis of the social cultural structure, and a self-sustaining mechanism to ensure a social, ideological, cultural, and financial stability over an entire span of society. Okay? Now, I'm purposely using these words, right? Because this tells us why a family is important. And I'm talking about a stable family unit. I'm not talking about a deformed form, right? I'm not talking about a corrupted form of what a family is, but I'm talking about one that is stable, that is healthy. This is what forms the basis of, once again, the entire social cultural structure, and a self-sustaining mechanism to ensure social, ideological, cultural, financial stability. All those things are important for humans, and this is based in the family. This is why it's important. Okay? Now, the second reason the family unit is important is because it is the nursery that generates the future generations. Right? It is literally, that's what it is. It is the nursery that generates and nurtures the future generation. A child's learning and socialization are most influenced by his immediate family or their immediate family. Okay? Why? Because the child, when they're, usually when they're born in the first few years, even if they do go half daycare, whatever the case is, and that's unfortunately a modern aspect, but usually, traditionally, it is the family members that are closest, or they spend the majority of time with a child, and so they are his or her primary social group. And this is what initially shapes the child's values and worldviews. All right? At the same time, unfortunately, it indicates why we have to be picky of where we send our kids to childcare, if we're going to send them to childcare. Right? We have to be very picky. And I understand some families need to send their children to, to childcare so that they be able to go out and provide for their own selves and their families. I understand that, but it tells us this is when we have to be very, extremely picky. Because it is this age, at that young age, even though we think they may not understand, the reality is they are absorbing everything, right? Their values will be shaped by who they're most in contact with, right? Their understanding of the social system and worldview is based on who they grow with. And they talk about the most important, aspect of the age starts from, 0 all the way to 5 years old. Can you imagine that? From 0 to 5, right? The majority of the personality and the person's identity is formed between that. And then from the ages of 7 to about 10 or 11 is where it kind of starts, and then that's it. There's only room for about 10% to kind of maneuver. And so this tells us that early childhood, that immediate contact with the family is important, but also we should be very careful what we show our kids. Right? This is why it's imperative. طيب. Now we also sense that, when I talk about that second point, that is the nursery for the future generation, when we think about it this way, this is why we understand then the huge emphasis that Islam places on how to pick one's spouse. Right? The Prophet ﷺ gave explicit instructions how a male should pick his future spouse and how the guardian of the female should make sure they pick their daughter's future spouse. Right? But also all the teachings that are placed around the treatment and interaction between family members and their roles that have been established between family members and the type of connection and relations that should go between father and mother and children and vice versa, from children to mother and father. Right? There's a reason behind all these teachings, because this is what you're creating. That family becomes that household, that nursery, that institution that will bring out several more individuals who are supposed to be productive in society as Muslims. Key word, remember, the previous definition, the whole purpose is built on servitude. Muslim unit, society, based Muslim, based on servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, now the third reason why the family is important, I'm going to mention quickly, is that it is a reflection of the health of our society in the present and a prediction of the future. If you look at the family society around us, I want you to look at the different families around us, right? Whether it's in Bridgewater, in Hillsborough, in neighboring townships, and then move a bit further, right, into the different townships in New Jersey, different Muslim, communities, and then move out to the different states, and then different countries in the world. I'm sure we have relations and family members, back home, but I want you to look at the family units, how they are. It will give you a very close pulse on the health of the present of the ummah, and it could give you a prediction of the future. Right? And the reality is, at least from my perspective, subhanAllah, we are almost in a mixed state. It's almost like a transition, right? Something has happened, and things have been shifting from one to the earlier, from one to the next. At least from me growing up, and I can see it a bit more, there's that phase of very liberal movement between family members and expanding to, at least starting from my generation, leaning towards a bit more to, no, I want to learn my religion a bit more. And alhamdulillah, we see a lot of the youth that are also turning to that, but at the same time, there's that battle that is happening, right? Some are directed towards more worldly stuff. Others are still interested in continuing more of an Islamic path. We are at a fork, right? And I guess can be kind of clearly seen. And so looking at, this is why the family is important. It's a pulse on the present, but also prediction of the future. طيب. Here's a question for you guys. I need you to discuss again. So why do we need to, and this should be easy, right? Why do we need to protect it? Why do we need to protect the family? So why do we need to protect that family unit? This is an important question, because I'm going to ask you why I'm asking this question. We live in a society. How does it portray family? Okay, here's the question. Does it encourage you to establish a family? No, it doesn't, right? It does not encourage you to start a family, right? And if you start a family, what are the things that are happening? Have you ever guys watched, I'm sure you guys watched it, but I want you to pay attention to movies and cartoons that portray the younger generation, the youth, teenagers, or children, and their relationship with the parents. What is it portrayed as? Huh? What? Okay, fine, that the child is rebellious, but why are they rebellious? Because they're wrong? No, who's wrong most of the time? The parents, right? Most of the time, the parents are the ones that are at fault, okay? And yes. They make what? Yes. That is true. That is the ultimate objective. I'm going to get to that, Sheikh. That is a very good point, right? Um, but let's go back to that portrayal, right? There's always a rift and separation, like, almost telling you, like, the children, encouraging children to rebel, that you have the right. They teach that your parents should not be, like, have dictating of what you should be doing or believing. Free your mind. They are stuck in the past. They don't understand you. They don't understand the current time. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this in my counseling sessions. My parents don't understand me, right? And that is not true, by the way, right? Yes, sometimes it can be a disconnect, but it's not completely 100% true. It is an idea that is always being, like, on a subliminal level implanted in the minds of the youngs purposely, right? And then, obviously, they make avenues. And so who is it that raises the child? Let's be honest, right? Nowadays, who raises the children? School. That tells you who's controlling? State, right? The school is a very powerful tool that would shape the minds of future generations. And there's a reason why the state wants to have control over education. There's a reason behind it, right? So they can control what is being taught to the children from a younger age, so they can themselves shape that worldview. So it is schools, followed by media, right? Followed by media, followed by, like, whatever, all forms of platform, like social media, movies, if they listen to music, essentially the lyrics, all these things, they tell them what they should be behaving like, what does a happy life look like, what is happiness, what your goals should be, what your moral models should be, right? So essentially, is that moving towards an Islamic perspective, a servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or away from it? Away from it, right? It is effectively causing the dismantle of the family unit. Can anybody tell me what's the percentage of marriage in the States? Huh? Yeah, can you give me a percentage? What is the percentage of marriage in the States? 20? 20%? Is that what you're saying? 10%? 50%? That's more like a divorce rate, Sheikh. Actually, it's 60% now, unfortunately. It's between 1 to 3%. Google it. Google it. I want somebody to Google this. This is one of the few times I'll tell you, take out your phones. I hate phones. Take out your phones, Google it. What is the marriage rate in the States? I need only one, I don't need 5. What? How much? 3.1%. Oh, it went up? Tab, alhamdulillah. We'll go with the maximum, 5.1%. Okay? It's less now, right? It's a lot less. But anyway, we'll say 5%. That's the marriage rate. Divorce rate is 50 to 60%. So what does that tell you? What does the family institute look like? Right? It really is not, it's not the best function. Now, I am aware that, yes, alhamdulillah, we're Muslims, but unfortunately, we're following, like, if you look at the divorce rates, it is terrifying, right? It is terrifying because we no longer base our role model of marriage based on the Quran and the Sunnah and the Islamic perspective. It is based on different things. It is based on the area that we live in or the culture that we live in, perhaps, of what is marriage supposed to be like, right? How the interaction is supposed to be. What are the roles between the spouses? How it's supposed to be, right? And there are very underlining, like, damaging ideologies that are spread in there, whether it's among the men or the females, that result in that 60% of divorce rate. And this is something that's why we're talking about this, the importance of protecting that first line of defense. Yes, sure. But that's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying even in the Muslim countries, it is the same. Why? Because the idea of what a marriage is and what we base it on and how we pick our spouses has been distorted. Do you think that the West does not export its ideologies to the East? Who controls the curriculum in Egypt now? We have to be realistic about things, but this is why we have to understand where we're at and why it's important we have to counteract that ourselves first and build that unit, right? Protect, that's what I'm saying. That's why it is safeguarding, the whole topic safeguarding our first line of defense, right? That's the core, right? That is the core aspect. Everything else comes around it, but our core, we need to protect that. And yes, they have got to that core, but that's why we need to counteract it. Right. So, I'm sure I gave you why we need to protect it, essentially, but I'm going to just reiterate this. So if the basic unit, right, of the basic unit of the Muslim society, okay, let me rephrase this. If we understand that the family is the unit, basic unit of Muslim society, then a breakdown of the family system is a breakdown of the Muslim society. That's what it is, basically, right? And by extension, by the way, other societies. Why am I saying that? Why am I saying that? Why am I saying a breakdown in the Muslim society is by extension a breakdown in other societies? That is true, but that's not why I said that. We have to understand our role as Muslims, by the way. Okay? We are the standard in the moral code and values. It is us. It is not them. Because our moral code and values is based on an objective system, and that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He tells us what is right and what is wrong. It's not based on our whims and desires. Now, if we understand that, then as Muslims, as a general, it is our job to be the compass, the moral compass of all societies. And if our society is breaking down, what is the hope for other societies? Really, there isn't, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, كُنْتُمْ خَيْرَ أُمَّةٍ أُخْرِجَتْ لِلنَّاسِ. You are the best of nations brought to the people. تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. You ordain what is good and prohibit what is evil. This is the role that Allah gave us, right? Because we understand that we have the correct moral compass. And we are supposed to guide the entire world to what is best for them, even if they think otherwise. Now, if we're breaking down, by extension, other societies will also not flourish, right? This is why I made that statement. All right, so essentially, right, when we talk about this, then consequently, the result of a deterioration of the Muslim unit or the Muslim family, the result of it will be one, deterioration in ideology, moral values, and religious practice. Okay, a breakdown in the Muslim family, right, unit will result in deterioration of ideology, moral values, and religious practice. The second, it will result in emotional, mental, and behavioral instability. Okay? Because remember, the function of a family, a stable family, is it nurtures all these things. If it is absent, do we have emotional stability? No, right? We don't. Or mental, which results in affected by that, or behavioral stability, right? Statistically speaking, obviously, right, this is like, we're talking about more like social sciences, there is a correlation between the increased level of criminal behavior and delinquency and divorce. There is a correlation, right? Single parent families, the larger the percentage of, in a society, there is an increase in criminal behavior and delinquency. Right? So there is a correlation. That's why I kind of brought this in. The last one I'm going to mention of why we need to protect it is interestingly, the productivity level of a society, and I'm talking about productivity level at every aspect, whether it is productions or intellectual production or whatever the case is affected across the board, right? When a family unit in a society breaks down, right? Productivity also breaks down, because you can understand this if you realize the majority of people, or a large percentage, are not doing well emotionally, mentally, and behaviorally, right? There's no sakina, there's no more tranquility, there's no more safe haven, there is no more a future generation that's being educated to carry on, right, in the best way possible. Here's a question for you then. If you're talking about protecting the family and safeguarding the family, what are we protecting it from? You can talk to each other if you guys want. What are we protecting it from? Sorry? Can you explain? Okay. Sorry? Secular indoctrination. Okay. So these are ideologies, by the way. These are views. So egocentric, right? Egocentric is an idea, which is essentially you do you, right? You do you, I do me, right? If we don't agree, khalas, it doesn't matter. It's okay. Just everybody is on their own. And subhanAllah, I see that a lot in some of the younger generations. They're very focused on fulfilling their own desires. It doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, what their parents say, it doesn't matter, right? Because essentially what they did is they equated between their desires and their identity. Like, you are your desires and desires are you. In Islam, it separates between those two things. In the Western world, they combine in between it. Like, they combine those two things, right? And you said, Ya Sheikh, what? No, you said something. Secularism. So whatever you're describing, will always be momentarily. Before one, maybe perhaps generation, second, third is gone. Right? Why? Because it's not based on servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's not based on the framework of Islam. Because why would you do what you're doing? You have to understand, desire is and worldly things that you want is a very strong, attractive thing. We need something else in its place that would take us away from that, something that is better. And in reality, that is the servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Wallahu alam. Tayyib. What are we protecting it from? What is our objective again? What's the objective of a Muslim family? Muslim unit of a society that is based on servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, good. So essentially what you're protecting your family from is anything that would prevent from achieving that objective. Anything and everything that would prevent from achieving that objective. And that's why I wanted to mention that definition a few times, so we can understand. So essentially, we have to realize that the reality is we live in a very global culture. We don't live in an individual. We're not boxed out anymore. We're not in a small society. We live in a global culture. Things that happen in the Far East, we receive it, and they receive things that happen in the West, right? But this global culture is driven by a secular framework. And I'm bringing this because, mashallah, Shaykh Omar reminded me of this. Now, the secular framework, what it does is isolates religion from public life. Now, once again, I want you to remember the objective of a Muslim family here when we're talking about this. The secular framework separates between religion and your public life. Essentially, what they're trying to do is they're trying to purge Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the collective mind of the modern world. Purge means remove. They're removing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the collective modern mind, so He's absent. And so this has to be filled with anything else. So when this happens, essentially, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is taken out of the equation, so you keep Allah at your home, and sometimes unconsciously we behave that way, by the way, right? They tell you, keep your Allah at home and in your worship places. He's not in the street. Like, your religion is at home, your temple or your place of worship, not in your workplace, right? This is why you find, subhanAllah, I'm telling you, we sometimes act upon this unconsciously. Whenever we don't ask for our religious rights at our work, or we want to keep silent because we're afraid of something, that tells you we are conforming to this, right? We are, one way or another. And that is very important for us to realize this, right? Because, and anytime we say, like, we're afraid to say, like, I'm sorry, I'm not going to show up to dinner, there's alcohol, it's against my religion. We think like, no, whatever, we have to separate our religion from these things, this is more business interaction. No, it's not, right? It's not. Allah's legislation comes before everything else. And they're there to safeguard you in the first place, right? So, whenever we forget or we remove Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from our daily lives, right? What ends up happening is that we forget ourselves how to be human. There's an interesting verse in the Quran that can be deduced from it, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Don't be like those who forgot Allah, right? Nasullah, forgot, which means that they left Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's absent from their minds. فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ. So He made them forget themselves. Those are the definitely disobedient. أُولَئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. Right? Those are definitely the disobedient. And so forgetting ourselves, essentially we forget how to be humans, proper humans, with proper moral codes and values, right? If you want to look at what the secular society does, believe me when I tell you, secular society is the one that establishes many of the world wars. It is not run by a religion basis. No, it is like, the mass destruction is based on secular views, right? The breakdown of a family and society is based on secular views. The breakdown of our moral values is based on secular views. It will never help because it will overly always change. And what secularism does pride itself on is the fulfillment of one's desire. That becomes your God. And if our God is our desire, why should we have any sort of moral values? Right? We get what we get whenever we can get it. Just take it. Right? So here's, طيب, that's fine. That is, I know. So listen, let's use that as an example, right? So your son effectively did cause a change. Think about it this way. He did cause a change. So we can change things. It's unfortunate sometimes when we take the position that we cannot change society. I'm telling you, we're all wrong. That's not true. Look at the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ, when he first started in Mecca, right? Anybody at that time, under the severe oppression, the torture, the killing, right? Would you ever think that Islam would enter Mecca? Would you guys ever think Islam would enter Mecca? The way what we live in, by the way, right now is far less. It's not as severe as what the Prophet ﷺ faced. But at the end, did the Prophet ﷺ stop? Did he stop? Did the companions stop? No, that's how we cause change. That's how we make, when we fight for our rights. I'll tell you something, like, Umar al-Khattab said something interesting. So this is a bit of a tangent. He said, عَجِبْتُ لِجَلَدِ الْكَافِرِ وَضَعْفِ الْمُؤْمِنِ. He says, I'm amazed at the strength of the disbeliever and the weakness of the believer. Why is he saying that? The disbeliever will fight for whatever he thinks is right. LGBT, right? Nudity, you name it. Anything that is vile, it always starts as a minority, but they fight for it. And this is how change happens. But as the believers, we have what is right. We should fight more. And your son did that, right? From a school where there was nothing to pray, and he was the only one, because he insisted on praying, what did they do? They got him a room. Now it's accepted that Muslims will pray in a room. It's given now that the Muslims will have the right to get a room. He did cause a change. It doesn't matter, right? But he did cause a change. And it's the job of the people coming after him to continue that change. But he did cause a change. Why? Because he held to his religion. He insisted on praying. And this is how we can cause change too. Right? Wallah A'lam. But anyway, back to my topic. Right? What are we talking about? What are we protecting our family from? Sheikh Omar. Yes. It is being consistent. Now, by the way, one of the things that harms us is the lack of consistency among us as Muslims. I'll give you an example, and I've had this issue with many of the MSAs and the problems. Establishing Jumu'ah prayers at schools. Okay, let me tell you what the problem looks like. MashaAllah, handful of enthusiastic young Muslims from the MSA approach the principal and say, listen, we need to pray Jumu'ah. This is when they enter 9th grade. We need to pray Jumu'ah. It is mandatory for us to pray Jumu'ah. Can you provide a room for us to pray? The principal says no. Why? Well, I have hundreds of Muslim students. Nobody ever approached me. You must be lying. You must be lying, right? I'm telling you, we sometimes harm ourselves because we're not consistent. Now, if that principal, from the minute he took that position, and he saw the first Muslim, right, like your son, for example, saying, hey, listen, I need to pray Jumu'ah, give me a place, it's not going to take us more than 10 minutes, right, lunchtime, whatever the case is, we'll gather the Muslims, we'll give our ceremonial speech and prayers, and we're leaving, right? And then that continues, right? And it will continue, and it will continue. Would that person think that Muslims are lying about anything? No. He'll realize that this is a religious right. But then when we are inconsistent, that makes people confused and say, you have different interpretations, why should I follow yours? You're a bit too strict, otherwise you don't have to, right? So we do sometimes do a disservice to our own selves when we're not consistent, right? But let's go back to the topic. It's a different topic, inshallah, right? So, the things we need to protect our families from, things that include actually, things that come in multiple different forms. Some of you guys already mentioned it. Some said the society at large, right? Somebody said society. Somebody said, am I right or wrong? Am I mishearing something? Did you say society or say culture? Things that we need to protect our family from. No, I said we live in a global culture that is driven by secularism, right? But one of the things we have to, but I think once somebody said culture, but it is true, right? So one of the things that we have to protect our family from is the society at large, right? Why? Because of whatever ideology they have. But that also sometimes includes things such as friends. What kind of friends? Schools, social media in its different forms, platforms, movies, books, sometimes even other family members, right? We need to protect our family from sometimes other family members, neighbors, right? Now, I'm being general for a reason, because not because they're Muslim, right? A Muslim neighbor, it means that automatically they're good. Or we have like a Muslim friends, it means that they're good. No, this is where the change also comes from within us, that we're going to talk about in a second. But so that being mentioned, I think I want to give enough time for chai before Isha. So what is the best way to protect our families? Hide your kids, right? Some people like, Sheikh, you make this so complicated. What are we going to do? Live underneath a rock, right? But no, I'm sorry. Make dua. Yes. But I have to mention, by the way, this is also a tangent, but as Muslims, we have to get into the habit when we're faced with a problem to stop looking everywhere else first and then in our religion. Sometimes we have this habit. When we have a problem, we look everywhere else. We scour the research, we look at the data, all these things. And the last thing we look at is our own teachings. We gotta stop doing that. There's a famous line of poetry that, who mentioned it? Can't remember who it was. So it says, كالعير في البيداء كالعير في البيداء يقتلها الظما والماء فوق ظهورها محمول. I'm going to translate what that means. كالعير means like the camels that في البيداء, which are in the desert, dying of thirst while it carries on its back the water. We have the water with us. The Quran and the Sunnah are teachings. It is with us, right? There's no reason for us to starve. There's no reason for us to look anywhere else, right? It really is a tragedy when we have the solution to deliver it to everyone, and we ourselves do not benefit from it. And so we need to go back to, right, our Quran and Sunnah, and we have to understand that the cures to every modern societal ill is in our religion. The cure is in our religion. We just have to implement it, right? So one of the most important things, yes, it is dua, right? It is a powerful weapon. So, but I'm going to mention a bit more of a, because we're talking about protecting our family, I'm going to talk to the parents, right? Or future parents, or even grandparents, because they're also parents. Being a role model. Being a role model, right? When we talk about family being the nursery home for the future generation, it means that the parents themselves and the grandparents, if they're there, they need to be role models and apply every aspect of Islam in their life. Not pick and choose, right, what we want to apply. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا ادْخُلُوا فِي السِّلْمِ كَافَّةً وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Right? O you who believe, enter wholly into Islam, which means apply everything in Islam. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. Don't follow the footsteps of the shaitan, because the shaitan will tell you to do otherwise. Not all of it. This, it's okay. This part don't apply. And then the next step is this part too. The following step, this is the third. MashaAllah, look, it's 99.9 something percent is covered. 3 things is not a problem. And then 4, and then 5, and then 6, and then 7. Slowly over time, that person moves away from the application of Islam. When they turn back again, they no longer recognize their application. They're no longer applying things as a Muslim, right? They're no longer applying things as that's not how it should be. We ourselves should be role models, right? First of all, and applying all of Islam, because the most influential source of religious influence in a child's life and to an adolescent is the parental religious practice. The parental religious practice actually helps give them proper foundation. Most people learn by seeing. Children specifically, they will emulate. They will behave like their parents. If you ever notice little kids, they dress up little girls dress like their mothers, little boys dress up like their fathers. At least what they used to when they had time. Now they don't. I know that because I remember that very carefully. I saw my kids transition between not having devices to all of a sudden having devices. They're very creative when they don't have devices. All of a sudden with the devices they no longer become creative. But the dressing and emulating you'll have with children that are not sitting in front of TVs because they want to be creative. I want to be like mama, or I want to be like grandma, or I want to be like grandpa, or sometimes they'll put a mustache, they put a tie, whatever it is that is around, they will emulate the parents, right? Take a child to a masjid, a young child, right? They will prostrate, their most favorite position is prostration, right? They'll run around, prostration comes, then they jump on their faces, right? They don't even prostrate properly, but they just lie on their faces. They're emulating, right? The religious practice of the parents
will give them proper foundation, right? But not just that, but also as parents, being righteous is actually in itself a source of protection to that future generation, to our own children. Like the example of Surah Al-Kahf, right? When Al-Khadr was passing by and he built that, the wall that was falling apart, and Musa asked him why. Later on, like he explains, he says, وَأَمَّا الْجِدَارُ فَكَانَ لِغُلَامَيْنِ يَتِيمَيْنِ فِي الْمَدِينَةِ وَكَانَ تَحْتَهُ كَنْزٌ لَهُمَا وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا فَأَرَادَ رَبُّكَ أن يبلغا أشدهما ويستخرج كنزهما رحمة من ربك. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this Quran, when Al-Khadr was explaining it, he said, as for the wall, it belongs to two orphans, right? That live in the city, and there beneath that wall is a treasure for them, and their father was righteous. And in some interpretations, it was not the immediate father, but it was the grandfather that was righteous. Because the grandfather was righteous, he still preserved his children and protected them. And Ibn Abbas said this regarding the interpretation. Like if you read the tafsir of Ibn Abbas, he said, حُفِظَا بِصَلَاحِ أَبِيهِمَا, right? So they were protected by the righteousness of their father. And essentially your righteousness on its own means that it has an impact on your own children. Now, of course, yes, we're talking about overall. Nothing is guaranteed. We still have outliers, like Nuh and his child. Nuh was a prophet, but his child was not a believer. But those are outliers, not necessarily the majority. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will protect the majority of your children. You're talking about increasing the chances. You're doing everything you can to protect your children. That includes being a role model. Now, one of the pious predecessors, Sa'id ibn Musayyab, he used to do this. Like when he read this verse, he understood this. And he would talk to his child. He would say, Ya bunay, inni la azidu fi salati min ajlik. Oh my son, I increase in my prayers for you. Like salah, his salah. I do more salah for you. Raja'a an uhfadha fiq. For the hopes that I would be, like you would be protected. Like my actions will protect you. And then he would recite the verse, وَكَانَ أَبُوهُمَا صَالِحًا. And their father was righteous. طيب. So, essentially, we're talking about being righteous, being that role model, is the number one protector, perhaps, protecting factor. Now, whether we want to admit it or not, parents are the child's most influential role model, right? Our kids will be as close to us usually as we behave, and so we have to be careful. As parents, we have to understand we spend more time with our children than any other adult, and they will emulate us. Right? So we have to become the best role models. This goes back again to the teaching of Prophet ﷺ of why we have to pick our spouses in the best way possible. Okay? طيب. The second thing we can do to protect our family, or safeguard our family, is build more than destroy. Build more than destroy. What do I mean by that? Build in our children and ourselves a line of defense that is composed of knowledge, elevated levels of spirituality, and consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and haya. The Sheikh said, the individual is the most important unit, but here's where change happens. Now, when you want to be a good role model, you have to change first. But also, when we're talking about building more than destroying, we need to build in ourselves and our children those four things, right? Knowledge. I'm not talking about secular knowledge. I'm talking about Islamic knowledge, right? Knowledge, level of spirituality, consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and haya. Why am I saying this? Because knowledge will protect us and them from misconceptions. Okay? Knowledge will protect us and them from misconceptions. The more knowledge we have in Islam, the more knowledge we have, it becomes so much easier for us to dismantle the amounts of misconceptions that are being spread. It becomes so easy. Sometimes it becomes even laughable. You're like, are you even thinking straight with that misconception? Right? But if we don't have that knowledge, it hits us and it places some doubt. Right? Like a lot of doubt that can lead a person to maybe perhaps doubt their own religion and faith. But the more knowledge we have, it fortifies us against misconception. A healthy level of iman, right, increased level of iman, will protect us from and them from falling to desires. Right? This comes from the hadith, like that the thief does not steal while he has iman. Right? Why? Because at that moment he's not completely conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Limit is so low, it allows them to steal. But if their iman was high, it would prevent them and protect them from stealing. That's a form of desire. And so essentially, knowledge will protect us from misconception. Our increased level of iman and spirituality will protect us from our desires. But also having consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that built-in consciousness will also protect in that aspect. Now, haya is also imperative. And unfortunately, that's a quality that is being looked down upon in the modern society. Haya is a quality that is looked down upon, right? In fact, it's talked about in negative terms, oh, he's too shy, or she's too shy, or too timid, or go ahead, you can talk to the opposite gender freely. Why are you so shy, embarrassed? No, this is something that is natural. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala placed us. Haya at multiple levels, right? But the basis of that haya is to understand that it's feeling shame that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would see you doing something that would displease Him. That is the core of haya. And so that is imperative. So, once again, I want you to notice there is a reason why there's a push to desensitize us and remove the barrier of haya by overexposure. Overexposure of things that generally should not be exposed in public, right? We see it quite often happen in movies and medias and whatever the case is, right? And you're going to notice people who 20 years back, when they see certain kind of attires or dress, you're like, oh my God, what's happening? I'm not talking about Muslims, I'm talking about even non-Muslims, right? But now that got distorted. Why? It's overexposure, right? That's what it is. It is purposely desensitizing, right? So that you become normalized with it. And so haya is slowly removed. Now, essentially all these things, they help us and our children develop an independent form of religiosity that is separate from the society, that's not dependent on the society, right? They have their own religions within them, so wherever we go, it is practiced. They feel safe. They'll start another unit, and you have established that. And it's important that we work on correcting our own worldview and the lens by which we view the world, that we have to make sure that it's an Islamic lens. Now, this will protect us and them, right, when we are faced with other worldviews. Right? Which time do we have? Right. One other thing that we can do to safeguard our family and our future generation is to prepare our children for the road, not prepare the road for our children. Do you guys understand the difference? Prepare ourselves and our children for the road, not prepare the road for our children. You look confused. Oh, really? Do you think so? I think it's easier to prepare the road sometimes. Here, take. Right? It's easier for you to feed them than make them feed themselves. Right? Right. And so sometimes we fall into that trap. So, now, when I say prepare them for the road, what I'm really looking at is that we have to be aware always of what is out there, okay? So we can better prepare them and ourselves for that future. It is detrimental for us as a society and a community, as a family, if we're oblivious of what is out there, right? Although the reality is that we will never be able to know everything, but if we prepare themselves, as we talk about spirituality with knowledge and haya and conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it would help safeguard what we miss, right? Because some things we will miss. Some stuff that is happening we will miss, because the older we grow, the more out of touch we are with some of the recent things that come out, no matter how much we try, okay? We will miss certain things, including the interesting lingo that comes up, for example, right? The language seems to change with things that makes no sense, and I had to learn firsthand what certain word means. Like obviously they understand if I'm puzzled, right? And sometimes it makes no sense, right? Like, what does drip have to do with your attire? I don't understand the connection, right? And apparently that's an old word now. Drip, there's apparently something else now. But things like that, right? For example, those are just small examples. But if you miss that, that is not important if you, if you had fortified your child ahead before that. Still, we need to do the best we can by knowing what is out there so we can prepare for it appropriately, right? Now, this requires that we ourselves, right, as Muslims, as elders, as protectors of our children, to go out of our way and educate ourselves regarding the correct Islamic views of whatever is happening around us, right? To learn the correct Islamic view and perspective regarding many of the contemporary issues that we're facing, how to deal with it. But it requires work, right? And we have to do that, and that is part of safeguarding our children. And so also part of preparing our children also entails teaching them about the reality of this world, that it is a test and it is not Jannah. Sometimes we forget and we try to provide everything for our children, to remove any sort of hardship from them, but that's doing a disservice. It is not helping them, right? Because the minute they feel the slightest of pain or hardship, they're going to object. What is this, right? No, we have to remind them this world is a test. You will be faced by tests and tribulations. Sometimes we have to remind ourselves. We forget. Because we live in a life that, mashallah, I'll be honest with you, if you go back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, we are kings and queens. We are, right? Many of them would never fathom living in, mashallah, the houses that we live in, or be transported in the type of transportation that we have, or eat the amount of food that we have, or all these things, right? We, by the measures of the past, we are living like kings and queens. But we forget that, right? We forget that. We get used to it. And so the first, few bumps on the road or the couple of calamities or tests that we're afflicted with, we sometimes object and we think that it's the end of the world. No, we have to remember that this is a test. We're not meant to live, this is not Jannah. It was never meant to be Jannah, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَنَبْلُوكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ fitna, right? وَنَبْلُوكُمْ بِالْخَيْرِ وَالشَّرِّ fitna. We will test you with good and bad. We'll test you with good and bad. طيب, they will need, the reason I'm saying this is because they will need to learn to be patient and resilient, right? Difficulty is part of this life and they have to learn it. طيب, the last thing I'm going to mention that would help safeguard our family, which really I think I should have dedicated more time to, is allocating time for our families, which is very difficult nowadays, right? Allocating time for our families. And I'm talking about quality time. Like, quality time is important because it strengthens the relationship between family members. It gives us insight into what is going on among our family members, what's happening in their lives, what is their thoughts, what are their opinions, what are their inclinations, their struggles, their strengths, their weaknesses. All that is important. That what brings people closer, and consequently, obviously, it brings family closer. And we play a role, when we play together, essentially, when we play together, when we laugh together, argue together, right, overcome our difficulties together, this is what a family is, right? We need that quality time. And the Prophet ﷺ used to allocate time to spend with his wives and his grandchildren. Like, there's a specific time of the day it is known. The Prophet ﷺ would go visit his wife a specific time, but also at Asr, after Asr time, this is where he goes and spends family time. Sometimes he would go out of his house and go visit his daughter Fatima across, walk across the market, go to the other side to go spend time with Al-Hasan al-Hussein. Now, we're talking about an individual who, hands down, is the busiest human being ever created. Is there anyone of us more busy than the Prophet ﷺ? The Prophet ﷺ was what? He was a husband, he was a grandfather, he was a father, he was a religious leader, a political leader, a military leader, a counselor, you name it, right? Do any of us have all these jobs together? We don't. But he still made sure he allocated time for his family, right? Um, yes. Pleased? Are you assuming this already, ya Sheikh? طيب. You know the saying that it takes a village to raise a child? Right? That statement is not false. Okay? To raise an individual who is uh, Assalamu alaikum, that is well balanced, right? Uh, well rooted in Islam, but also who's stable, it requires the participation of, in the education even, of the different parts of what we have. So that includes the family itself. Bringing your child to weekend school is in no way sufficient to counteract the public school, the screen that they watch, the YouTube channels that they watch, the movies that they watch, the neighbors, what they talk about, their peers at school, what they say. It is nowhere sufficient, right? You have to bring in the role of the family using teaching moments at home. This is why family time is important, right? Especially if your child goes to public school, you need to have that channel of conversation. They need to talk to you and explain to you what is happening, and you need to listen. What are they learning in school? What are the ideas they're placing in their head? So you can take teaching moment opportunities, and whether you say stories or you guide them in Islam, we believe this, or whatever the case is you need to do in order to kind of correct this. Now, there's also the role that the masjid plays, right? And so if it's between, the weekend school also, but even the masjid, there should be, inshallah, hopefully in the future we can establish this, other weekly programs that the kids are involved in. Not necessarily just educational, but even, just social things, for example. Creating a network of family members with like-minded principles, which is important to form that support network, right? And so now you have home, the weekend school, right? The masjid, family members. All this is what's required. Now, once again, they all have to be on the same page. It doesn't work even if you put your child in a Islamic school from 6 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and they teach them one thing, and at home you teach them the opposite. It doesn't work, right? Because they will incline more towards what you say. My mama said, or my baba said, or whatever the case is, right? It all has to be on the same page. And this is what raises a child. Hopefully that answers your question, Sheikh. But let's go back to quality time, okay? Now, quality time. You remember I said role models? Right? Role models. So, most of us, our children have devices already in their hands, right? Now starting at the age of 3 years old? 2 years old, right? Wallah, Sheikh, I met a 2-year-old that knows how to use a game more better than I can. They can't speak. They're not talking. They just kind of flung my finger and they kind of, with their, just with their hand, they kind of did this to me. And I was amazed but sad at the same time at, mashallah, the cognitive power of a child at 2 years old, what they can do. And I was sad that it was invested in something that is useless, right? But that being said, our children have devices. Those devices take away from that family time. Essentially, they're bringing everything that is outside to your home, right? Remember, we're talking about global culture now? Whatever's outside now, they're in your home. In the past, when you're at home, you're by yourself, right? The children will all gather in the living room because this is where people gather, and we sit there, and we all have conversations, we eat together. But now, even if in their room, what do? They're on their devices, okay? Talking to their friends, talking to other things. In the past, when people wanted to talk to you, they had to call you on the phone, or they had to knock and visit. But most of the time, they're not there. Now, 24/7, our friends, our peers, other things that are happening have constant access to us. That is not healthy. Now, when I talk about role model, I'm speaking to the parents. You, first of all, need to learn how to put that phone down, right? Put that phone down, right? This is then when you start having the right to tell your children, put the phone down. Because if you don't, and you tell them, put your phone down, they're going to tell you, well, you're using it, right? You remember we said we have to be role models first? This is essentially what it is, right? And they will emulate us. If they have their laptops in their rooms, take it out. Because they should not be in the rooms, because they will be in the room 24/7. I know, ya Sheikh, what time it is. It's okay. We'll conclude in a bit, inshallah. But that is the last advice I have. But it's really important, right? To make sure that we have that family time, that outing, because this is where communication happens. This is where everything else will fall into place, whether it's the education or understanding what happens with your child or being able to do all these things. That is important. Schedule those meetings if you need to. Have a meal together if you need to. This is imperative, right? The way that the way things are going, the connections are not there. Children and parents mostly spend their time in their bedrooms. More than anything else, they're not coming out. No. Set it up so that they would come out, inshallah. And all this requires, us to be proactive and active family members, right? They need both the mother and the father to be on the same page. I'll stop here before I get scolded. And by the way, it's the sunnah. It's the sunnah, right? The time is not the sunnah to start the iqamah, right? Time is what? Sunnah's chai, okay. By the way, so when the imam says yalla, we'll do yalla, right? Which is essentially me, right? جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك استغفرك واتوب اليك. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. We do need more time. Next week, inshallah.